If we take it to the national level, one big idea for getting the 2% solution rolling would be to place a national cap on global warming pollution and then simply require the cap to shrink at least 2% per year. To verify this kind of a system, global warming polluters would have to buy pollution permits for every ton they emit at a government auction. We asked Dr. Maren Landers and Alex Tinker to explain this cap and auction system. And now listen carefully, because after they're done, we're going to ask you to vote on what you would do with $100 billion.
Here's how cap and auction works. First, Congress would set a limit on the amount of global warming pollution that could be emitted from the burning of fossil fuels across the country in a given year.
For example, the government could require emissions of carbon dioxide to stabilize by, say, 2013.
Then the cap would shrink over the next few years, cutting emissions to get us on track for the 2% solution, cutting 2% per year for the next 40 years.
Once the cap was set, the government would auction off permits for the right to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Again, up to the limit of that year's cap.
So if a company wanted to sell a ton of coal or a barrel of oil, then to do so, they would have to purchase permits to cover the CO2 emissions that would be released when that fossil fuel was burned.
Each year, the government would auction off a set amount of pollution permits, but those permits could in turn be bought and resold among companies in private markets.
To support a freeze on global warming and emissions across the U.S., economists estimate that companies would be willing to pay around $30 per ton for a CO2 permit. Some of the added costs of fossil fuels would then be passed on to consumers, leading to a widely expected increase of about 30 cents per gallon to the price of gasoline and about 2 cents per kilowatt hour for coal-fired electricity. The anticipation of these future price increases, in turn, would immediately begin a shift towards low-polluting cars and a much bigger shift away from coal-fired power, allowing the country to stay under the CO2 pollution cap. Auctioning these permits would generate a lot of money, well over $100 billion per year. One important use of these revenues would be to cushion Americans from the impact of higher energy prices by issuing a check every year to each American for their equal share of auction revenues.
Because wealthier Americans consume so much more energy than average, such a policy would actually increase the overall income of 60% of American households. The dividend check they would get in the mail every 3 months, their share of the auction revenues, would more than offset any increased spending on gas and electricity.
Some of the auction revenues could be spent on other needs. A crash investment program in renewable energy that could revitalize American industry, or a program to create millions of green jobs to weatherize and solarize houses and commercial buildings across the country, or funds to retrain workers, especially in the already declining coal sector, who would gradually lose jobs as the nation slowly transitioned from pollution-intensive fuels. That's cap and auction, one way we can get on track for the 2% solution. So are you ready to vote?
Okay, now let's hear from all of you. What would you do with $100 billion in auction revenues generated from a cap and auction policy? To vote, choose from the following 6 options. Checks. Cut checks to Americans to cushion the increase in energy prices. Retool. Retool America's industry and retrain workers. Assist. Assist developing countries in the clean energy transition. Create. Create green jobs and weatherize and solarize America. Fund. Fund research and development programs for long-term solutions to climate change. And wild. Provide funding to help wildlife survive global warming. Now, these are all good ways to spend the auction revenue, but we want to know which you think is the most important. Where should most of this money go? If you've already made up your mind, go ahead and text in your vote now. Otherwise, hold off while we hear more about these options. Okay, Van, how about you? Which would you vote for?
Well, for me, it's pretty obvious. We've got to make sure that any of these things that we do, there are workers who are trained to do the work. The president could sign a law right now to give us everything we want on global warming. The president's not going to put up one solar panel. The president's not going to weatherize one home. We've got to have a green-collar workforce to carry out all these incredibly important tasks. If we don't have the workers, it's all just talk. So I think we should make sure that we do all the things you just said, but let's make sure we train those workers too.
All right.
And give people green pathways out of poverty.
Okay, thanks, Van. Hunter, where would you vote?
Buy beer?
Oh, all right.
No, really, I would invest it in the ASSIST program. The UN reckons that for $121 billion, we can meet all the needs of people in the developing world. You know, we spend $18 billion a year now buying makeup. For $12 billion, we could provide reproductive health care for all women. We spend $17 billion buying pet food. We could eliminate hunger for $19 billion. You go through all the needs around the world. If we had $100 billion, there are a lot of good ways to spend it.
Praveen, there is actually now a cap and auction bill in the U.S. Senate. Is that correct?
Yes, the Warner-Lieberman bill. This is the only comprehensive global warming bill that's moving in Congress right now. It's also the only bill that ultimately requires 100% auction of emissions allowances. This gets us moving forward immediately. The longer we wait, the more difficult it is to stabilize emissions. There's also the risk of overshooting our 450 parts per million target. And additionally, that has very, very dangerous implications. And if we wait 2 to 3 years for another bill, we just don't have that kind of time. And this is why Congress needs to act right now.
Does this bill get us on track for the 2% solution?
Absolutely. It gets us through 2025. Without action, the U.S. would increase its emissions 30% by 2020. This bill would help reduce emissions 20% by 2020.
Okay. Well, Penelope, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that there are some problems with Warner-Lieberman, but it's a start. There's no perfect bill. And even when we went after ozone layer protection, we signed a treaty, we enacted a global law, and it wasn't perfect. And we knew it wasn't perfect. We knew there'd be new evidence, there'd be new technologies, there'd be new opportunities, and so we could revisit. We could revisit the treaty, or in this case it's like legislation, we could revisit it and improve it. In fact, sometimes we went so fast, so much faster in fact, than we ever anticipated, and things were cheaper. So the idea is to not let delay the trap, not be delayed by the trap of thinking that there's going to be any one perfect solution, any one perfect bill. Let's get on with it. Let's announce that the United States is getting off the dime and that we're ready to participate as full citizens of the world.
So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, in other words. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, don't forget to send in your votes on what you do with $100 billion. We want to know. And